to the 15th review of small literature, to our second evening. Yesterday we had a wonderful conversation with Mansoura Al-Zaldin and Nail Al-Tubhi, and tonight with us is Yasser, Abdel Latif, and also Ahmed, Refaat, who will join us, who is here, but he'll join us sometimes a bit later in the conversation. I would like to first introduce our guest, Yasser, and also to wish him a warm welcome to Zagreb and to the festival dedicated to Egyptian literature. Yasser Abdel Latif is a writer, a translator, a poet. He published several novels, essays, short stories, poetry collections, and he's also a translator and has translated many classics from French and English to Arabic. And luckily, we also get to have some of his works translated, or parts of his work translated, in this anthology published during this festival and for this festival. As a first thing, maybe to just open up the discussion, I would like to ask, Yasser about his thoughts when he was invited to the festival, and also as a translator, having his work translated to Croatian, and also as we had the luxury and luck to already talk yesterday and to get to know each other a bit. And I know that there were also some previous connections to this area, to the former Yugoslavia, so maybe we can talk a bit about that as an intro point to this evening.
Good evening. First, for your question, I don't know the language here, the Croatian language, and I don't know any of the Slavic languages, and I feel it's very difficult to, as a translator sometimes, and as a writer, when my work is translated into another language, like I know French, I know English, sometimes even if it's in Italian, I can read it and I can understand it, but for the Croatian, it's completely strange to me. It's not foreign to me. I don't understand what the phrase might be saying. But also with Croatian, it's a little bit easier than, for example, the other Slavic languages that use the Cyrillic letters, the alphabet. So I'm not really sure the translate, but I trust you. That's it. But I'm happy to also being here. Yeah, and I feel very familiar with the place. I was talking to Nail and Mansoura today that we don't feel very strange, very foreigners here. We don't feel strange. So it's very warm and familiar, and modest in the good sense of the word. The city. It's some cities you feel that you're facing an enormous thing, monumental thing, but here it's very cozy and small and warm.
Now, as you said about this feeling of familiarity, I feel somehow that I can jump to this question that I anyhow wanted to ask you at one point. And the thing is, you moved from Egypt to Canada in 2009, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And I have a wonderful quote of yours that I would like to read, and then maybe we can, get into that discussion. You wrote an abrupt cut to the soundtrack and a jump on the visual screen. This is how I envision my move from Egypt to Canada. With the exception of short trips never exceeding 3 months, I have lived my entire 40 years in Cairo with its tolerable clamor and unbeatable cacophony. I would like to, to hear a little bit how this experience of moving to Canada, how was it in general, and also how it affected your writing.
Well, I moved to Canada for very personal and family reasons. I'm not exiled or anything like this. So the shift was really hard of going from a place like Cairo, a city like Cairo, which is 20 something millions, and all this noise everywhere, to a place like Edmonton in Canada, which is, it's a very quiet city and dull. Nothing happens till the extent that they show the car accident in the news and on the TV. The ordinary car, oh, 2 cars had an accident today. So it's very dull and very calm, and it's not a small town, it's a big city, a million people city. And I had no friend that time in the beginning of my time there. I had no friends. I stayed doing my freelance job as translating, as a translator and as a writer from the home. I didn't have the chance to meet with people, to interact with the Edmontonian society. First 2 years were really hard, but after I started to practice the job as an interpreter in the courtyard, in the labor office, to some Arab workers who live there who don't speak English. And that's how I started to interact a little bit with the society. But it's completely different anyway than what we know about a country. So that's why I don't feel here very strange, because such a country like Croatia is like us. In North America, it's something different completely, in everything.
In what ways did you feel?
Culturally, and even the topography of the city. It's not like, we don't have that small streets with small shops like bakers and tailors, and in North America they don't have this. You have big malls with big brand shops and chain stores, but nothing is very personal. You don't have this personal relation with your with the electrician. You don't have this personal relation with the neighborhood baker or the neighborhood grocery shop. And it's a very cosmopolitan society. You have people from all around the world. It's an immigration place. But communities don't interact between them. Though you have the Chinese community and the Indian community, the Arab community, the white people from Anglo-Saxon, and every community is in his own world. In the second generation, in the schools, for example, you have all the kids mixed up from all around the world. So, and but for me, as a person from the first generation, I don't fit.
Well, one of the ways to deal with this is definitely writing. And so maybe I would just, as an intro into your work and a further discussion, I would maybe ask you now to read a bit from your work. We will also see the translation, and you'll be able to follow it in Croatian, just behind on the screen, and we'll get to hear it in Arabic. It's not the full story, that is true. We wanted you to have a little bit of glimpse of the story, just to get an impression, and of course we encourage you to read more. The thing I wanted to ask you about this story, the sort of the underlying theme that is present in it, and I think that can be connected with the Egyptian society, is the military thing, the militarism. And there is one point where you say that he thinks of the words of a patriotic song that goes, when words go silent, the guns speak. Something in that terms.
Yes.
And he thinks about it intensely. So can you maybe talk about how this military presence that's very kind of obvious in Egypt, has been for decades, how it also ends up as a theme, as a motive, or part of the atmosphere in your works, in your stories.
Well, I refer here to the time of the war in the 70s, in the early 70s, when I was just in the kindergarten. Well, we have the same state of the military regime in Egypt till now, since the 50s. But the presence of the soldier or the military people in the streets, it's often on, not always with the same intensity in the street. You don't see them always present, the military people. But now I think it's more after June, 30 June 2013, it's more and more militarized. And you have those generals in all the institutions now, in the factories, in the television, and everywhere. In civic suits, but they are generals.
And how do you explore that through your work? Do you write about that? Is it something that you think is worth dealing with in your writing?
Well, I'm not concerned directly, in a direct way, in politics in my writings. Well, I can deal with politics in if I treat like approach another non-fiction approach, but in the fiction or in poetry, I'm not very politicized. I'm away from, not away, but your conscience is always politicized. When you discuss a very personal matter, it's also a political matter. This kind of politicized literature doesn't interest me.
Can you tell me, you also write poetry this year in the anthology? We do not have as much poetry as we did previous years, unfortunately, but that's why I also wanted to ask you, since you also write poetry, to maybe talk to us a little bit about the difference, between writing poetry and, to you personally, what do you think? Can you explore some things through poetry that you cannot through other forms of writing, and sort of what do you find in it when you write poetry?
You touched the answer in your question. With poetry, you can approach meanings and images that won't be caught by any other form of writing. Because the relation between words in poetry, it's not only this تسلسل sequence, yeah, it's not the another type of relation between the words in poetry, and this reflects new meanings, which is not usual.
In what ways? Can you tell us? Can you give us an example for all of us not that deep into poetry, maybe?
Well, I would say it's verses by an Egyptian poet that I love. He said, الخروشة ما خبرش بتخنق هلالية كروان الوادي ولا على الكروان باتنين. Can you translate this? Well, this is, you can translate this. And we can say what it's about exactly, but we feel it, but I can feel it.
Okay.
So it says what you can say, like kind of like music, but the meaning is more present than me. But it's a level of music, not definitely the music of the words itself, but the music of the images, the music of the inner music.
And tell me, a lot of your writing, at least what we had the chance to read while preparing this anthology, you have a lot of references, a lot of musical references, a lot of film references, and from a lot of literary references, from Judas Priest to Charles Dickens. So if you could maybe talk a bit about that, is it something that you particularly pay attention to? Is it a way of paying homage to different art forms and influences? Or how does it get, how does it end up in your writing?
Well, sometimes it's a sort of homage, really, and sometimes it's a way to describe the atmosphere of the time. Well, I mentioned Judas Priest, for example. In this story, I want to refer to the 80s in Egypt, the musical atmosphere in my neighborhood, specifically. This tendencies towards heavy metal and rock and roll, the English invasion, and such stuff. I'm also very interested in the cultural history, if you can say that, of Egypt, mainly in the 20th century. This is one of my concerns. I used to write about cinema, and now more about music. I write more about like kind of critique, kind of history. So this is the way to reflect the time for me, the cultural history.
Now, talking about cultural history and getting more into some other topics, I have some other questions that we will open up later, but maybe I would use this moment to find Ahmed, if he is somewhere around here, to join us on the couch, because Ahmed Refaat is our film expert, our film selector at the festival, and the films he has chosen, you will have the chance, I hope, to see from Tuesday to Thursday, and it's a program we do in cooperation with the Human Rights Film Festival. And I wanted to use this chance maybe to open up the discussion a bit more, and also for Ahmed to get a chance to maybe present the program that we will have here at the festival, to say something about the films. And then also, since you are both very interested and do a lot of work in terms of culture in general, then maybe we can also talk about different things, and also, of course, at some point allow for our audience to take part in the discussion. But maybe first to say a couple of things about Ahmed Refaat, was born and raised in Alexandria, if I'm correct, living in Cairo at the moment, is film reviewer and a sort of a filmophile of a kind, and he works at the Contemporary, let me pronounce this well, Contemporary Image Collective, which is a collective that deals with visual practices in Cairo. And he will maybe tell us a bit about his work and how he got to choose the films that we will be able to see during the festival. Yes, yes. Welcome.
So when Mika first sent me about about what they're doing here, about that they want to have like a parallel program to this literature festival, I first thought about something that relates to literature in a way. So that is one layer of the program, and it contributes by one film, which is The Fallen Angels Paradise, that is written by Mustafa Zeki, and can be considered a novelist and a writer, and it's also adapted from a novel. But it's only an excuse to relate to the literature world, but what I really wanted through showing that film is an attempt at an impossible attempt in a way to tell you where I'm from, or what is Cairo in a way. And it is impossible to describe Cairo, but I think that film gives a feeling around the city that I truly feel, so I wanted to show that. The other thing, then Mika said, look, there will be this Human Rights Film Festival happening at the same time, and we're doing this collaboration with the Human Rights Film Festival. So the second layer comes from an engagement with the human rights discourse that I like and hate at the same time. And so I tried to build something around. There are some films, especially shorts, that deal with the notion of working in the field of human rights and how that can be hard and how those workers have their own suffering and how they discuss it and how they talk about it. So in the shorts program, there's a film by Nada Hassan that is mainly about that. She collects it's testimonies from people who work in the field of human rights, and she makes she uses those testimonies to make in an artistic way to make what I think is a very interesting short film. Also, the whole program, and specifically one feature by Nada that is called Happily Ever After, is trying to deal with the continuity of what's before 2011 and what's after 2011, mainly through continuity and not discontinuity. So and also a film that brings what's personal to something huge happening outside, like in the streets, and there's protests and there's what we call revolution. So that's also a layer, and another layer is the act of witnessing. So when you witness something something huge happening in your family, for example, something huge happening in your country. So film by Hala Lutfi, Khurul al-Nahar, Coming Forth by Day, and two other films, shorts that will be in the shorts program by Maha Ma'moon and by Salma Shamil. They're trying to, I contextualize, and I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of them, but I'm trying to contextualize them around this notion of witnessing. So what a filmmaker have as a relationship to a big event, whether that big event is political or personal, and I thought witnessing is something that relates to human rights work in a way. So yes, I think that's the program.
Maybe since this is one of the rare chances to sort of talk about Egypt in general here in Croatia, and for people to hear about different aspects of life in Egypt. And I thought that maybe in relation to the Egyptian cinema, we could talk a bit about, there is this period that is kind of known as the golden age of Egyptian cinema, from the 40s to 60s, when the production was one of the largest in the world. And maybe if we could give a bit of a historical context, Ahmed, if you can talk a bit about that and sort of get us through some of these periods for all of us that are maybe not that familiar or not familiar at all with it.
So that's not easy to tell the history of cinema. It's very tempting to lie about it, but there's other Egyptians. So I would say that it's one of the oldest cinemas. We got like a screening during the 20s, and that was during the colonial times. So we've been a colonized country, and they brought cinema and filmmaking, and I think one of the first screenings on the planet was in Alexandria, if I'm not wrong. So, and then you get to the period between the wars, and you get a flux of reels, basically 35 millimeter reels coming in thousands or in hundreds to Egypt. And I think that as something that is not related to the art itself, but the infrastructure of it, is a big part of why there's a huge amount of films during that period. So, and then that was anti-colonial movement. Part of this anti-colonial movement was also local capitalism, national capitalism, and that include Mr. Talat Harb. And they started a studio, like the real Hollywood model of a big studio producing lots of films. You got also the infrastructure of it. You got the editing rooms. You got the sound tools and sound technicians. And you also get Cairo as the center of cinema in the whole region. So you have people coming from Lebanon, and you have people coming from Palestine, and you have people coming from everywhere to actually act, direct, produce. And I think this also can be told about journalism, for example, and other stuff that was happening in Cairo. Yeah. It's a center of the region somehow. So it's called Egyptian, but it's also Arab in a way. So, not exclusively Arab, there's also Armenians and other people who were included. So, that is, I think, part of the golden era, if you can say so. And then comes the 60s, and then Nasser, and then the nationalization happens to the industry. So the industry becomes nationalized, and it's nationalized in the way that the new state, it owns everything. It owns the production houses, it owns the distribution, and it owns the exhibition spaces. So that is, in a way, that can be discussed for hours and hours, and there's whole books around the nationalization of cinema, but it's like everything else, it's good and bad. You got millions flux to make what should be big propaganda, but you got also Shadi Abdel Salam doing the mummy. So it's big, but it's also, you got some huge...
And a lot of entertaining movies.
And a lot of entertaining films, of course, yeah. Not just big.
Not just propaganda.
Not just propaganda. But, so, lots of stuff happens, and it's also the time where what I think is one of the most important things happens, that people start cine clubs. Cine clubs is where a bunch of cinephiles, they used to meet in the cinema called Cinema Nil, the Cotton Nil, Opera Square. And they show, they have a weekly meeting, and they show stuff that is coming from here, from Yugoslavia, and from all around the world. That was an art cinema. So you show Pasolini, you show films from Yugoslavia, you show films from the Czech Republic. You show films from everywhere that you do not get in commercial cinemas, and that starts a movement. And that movement used also something that have been nationalized, which is the cultural palaces, or what we call cultural palaces.
Yeah.
We don't need to explain. Cultural palaces is places that have been nationalized, and they become art spaces. Mm-hmm. So also with the cine clubs movement starts those moving cine clubs. So you have a critic with a film reel, carrying a film reel, and going to those cultural palaces, showing them, introducing them, which also helped starting something that is called that is a movement around writing about cinema and discussing films. And I think that's, in my opinion, very important. And then, of course, even I think early 60s, they started the Film Institute, so you can actually learn cinema in Cairo.
Yeah, before that, people used to travel to learn filmmaking abroad in France or in Germany mainly, and some of them went to Hollywood, but mainly in France and Germany.
So just to jump, and then you get to the 70s, after the 60s, and the 60s is the thing that I was talking about, the big first nationalists cinema. On the 70s, you get the people who want to change the discourse from, oh, everything is national, everything is, you know, we start talking about what the state is doing, the prison system, you start talking about the dawn visitors, the police that comes and take people from their houses. So 70s, you start with this, and comes the 80s, where you have what we call the new realism. So it's a whole new generation of filmmakers where you start to go out and you see Cairo, from the streets of Cairo. You see people, you see the actual people. You see, you know, cameramen carrying their cameras and shooting around. You see realism that you can compare to the French New Wave and Italian New Wave and all those new waves. That was Cairo's new wave. It came in the 80s. 90s, you go to some everything. You can feel the privatization. Also, something very corrupted happened, that the producers, they can also own distribution companies, and distribution companies can also own exhibition spaces, cinemas. So, which you can tell at the end is a very corrupted cycle, because producers, they want their films to be shown. So that's what happens, almost a monopoly over the whole process, and which leads into fewer films, way fewer films being produced, and way fewer Egyptian films being actually end up in Egyptian cinemas. And now there's something like, now that after 2016, the Egyptian state decided to invest in Egyptian cinema, so they monopolize it, and specifically the intelligence, whatever it's called. So the Egyptian state put lots of money into some specific, mainly two production companies, and those two companies, they're getting all the allowances to produce films, so producing most of the films actually that are being now shown in Cairo. So
this
it's
is
a monopoly in a way.
This is not a public sector. This is not the money of the state. This is the money of the intelligence, which is not our money. And this is a very strange way of production. It's not a public sector, and it's not a private sector. It's something mafia state sector. I don't know how to call it.
I mean, we can call it corruption, of course.
Well used and often used words, I think, in Egypt, but also, I mean, in Croatia too. You said that, you know, in the among the films that we will be able to watch in the following days, in the next week, and this is a question that sort of is for both of you. I think you said that there are films who deal with rather with the continuation, not with the discontinuation in relation to 2011. So maybe if you can talk about that in terms of films, not just in terms of this specific film, but maybe in terms of some of the content that appeared in films that were made after 2011, but also if we could re-examine them in terms of not just this rupture, but also connection. Maybe that's not that obvious to the previous times.
Produced after.
Well, I think I claim that that some films predicted the evolution in a way, that you can see scenes that actually happened in 2011 in films that were shot in 2009 and were written in 2010. So that's also, I think this is how it goes with, I mean, I don't know, but I think this is how it goes. So you have a very, for example, you can see some of the demonstrations that you saw in the 2011 Tahrir and in the media were actually in a film by Yusuf Shaheen and his colleague that was called Hiya Fawda. And also there's another film that is called Bintin Min Masr. And in that film you see that there's something like there's an engine. It was a huge accident that happened, that one of the boats that goes back and forth between Saudi Arabia and Egypt actually sank. So the body is delivered to the Egyptian port, and then their relatives, you have to check the bodies to see the dead people. And in that film, there is some of the scenes in the engine of the boat that is about to explode. You can see something is about to explode. The whole film is built around the idea that something is about to explode. Also, the film Coming Forth by Day is Hala Lutfi, the filmmaker. She wanted to do this film from 2008, and due to restrictions on productions and stuff like that, the film was released after 2011, 2012. So, and she's dealing with something very personal, but it's also about this daughter who's stuck in the house with her dying father, and the whole film is about her getting out for just one day, for just one night, and you see also, I think it's Cairo on the eve of 2011. It's darkish, and it's something is about to happen, and also, you know, the whole idea of the dying father. The father is about to die, and then something happens, something else is going to happen. So, also another Riyadh film, she's telling something very personal, something, her own love story with what will become her husband after. And she's telling the story also mirroring what's happening outside. So the revolution happens, and of course something happens in the relationship. The revolution also goes down, and of course something happens in the relationship. The boyfriend wants to leave, and of course that affects the relationship. So that's, I don't know if that answers.
And Yasser, could you maybe talk a bit, you said some of your friends are filmmakers, and sort of this area of filmmaking is also something that you have intimate connections with. And maybe if you can talk about, you know, witnessing also, not just watching films and enjoying films and writing about films, but also witnessing people who, you know, the process of filmmaking and maybe how dreadful it can be. And if you could maybe just talk a bit about that from your personal perspective in terms of the work that some of the people that you know, have done, but also at what cost maybe at some times, and just generally to give us a bit of an introduction into that.
Well, I can talk about the independent movie movement that started in the late 90s, by the end of the century. And I participated somehow in this movement with a friend of mine. I was working that time in the TV, in the Egyptian TV. And it was a new series of TV channels that was opened around 1998, 1997, 1998, called the Nile channels, thematic channels like entertainment channel, cultural channel, and I worked in the entertainment one. And we kind of established that the chain of channels, and we were all freshly graduate people from the university, and mainly from the Cinema Institute. So I have this connection with young filmmakers, And a friend of mine, whose name was Magar Hela, we started to make small documentaries with a small camera and editing suit in the house. And around this time, in the end of the 90s, started this movement, by coincidence, in different places in Cairo and in Alexandria. Different people started to have their own editing suite on their computers and shooting with small DV cams and making movies. And places such like cultural centers like Goethe Institute, like the French Cultural Center, those start to show those films more and more. Hala Lotfi, the one who made this film, Coming Forth by Day, she belongs to this movement exactly. She was working with me in the same channel, and she was concerned about documentaries in the beginning, making documentaries. We worked together in one movie that never was finished, about an old singer, Egyptian singer.
Why was she concerned about documentary filmmaking?
Well, she liked to say true stories. She's not. If you saw this, her movie, it has a lot to do with her life, her real life, and her real vision. And it's not a fiction thing. Though it's fiction, but it's really her. And also, I think that she was a writer, Hala, before she studied political science before shift to cinema. I think at that time, making documentaries was the best way to be engaged with the reality. I worked in this small industry for I was really enjoying it. It was a way of writing too, but with a different medium.
And how is it nowadays in terms of documentary versus fiction films?
I would say that the line is thinner, and I think people are trying to work with what you can say about as documentary techniques or documentary aesthetics in the fiction films, and vice versa. People are trying to fictionalize some of the documentaries they're working on, and part of it is related that also this is like a universal tendency towards those aesthetics, and the money comes mainly from European institutes and money doesn't come clear, it comes with certain aesthetics because you attend a workshop and they tell you, maybe you can change this in your film, or you can do this, or you can do that. And I'm not saying that there's nothing special or specific about the films, but this is happening also in a whole context, and this context affects how the films end up. So this is what I can say about there is lots of documentaries that end up in big festivals now. You can see Egyptian documentaries in something like the Cairo Film Festival. You can see Egyptian documentaries going to international film festivals, especially after 2011. They were accepted. They have more money to produce it. Historically, it was, I think, only state institutions who produced documentaries. So you have what Yasser talked about, which is also a state institution that produced documentaries. You have the Egyptian Film Institute, was the part that produced documentaries. You had the High Cinema Institute also at a certain producing the graduation projects, and at certain times we're actually screening one of the films. I tried to include those two films from earlier times, from the 70s and early 80s, by two documentary filmmakers, to address the history of documentaries produced by the state. So.
One question that would go also for both of you, and that I was thinking about, was being, having a chance to participate in different kinds of events like this, and also, Yasser, you traveling a lot to different also literary festivals, and being in different places in the world, talking about your work, and being always contextualized in a certain way depending on a place where you are at the moment and how they perceive Egypt or the places where you're coming from. I would like to open the discussion about, are there some tendencies that you sort of noticed in terms of how your writing is contextualized and that you maybe not find adequate, or you yourself do not, perceive it that way? And can we maybe talk critically also about the, different, for you, Ahmed, in terms of different perception of the films or visual practices when you go to different places, or when somebody from Europe or wherever comes to Cairo and sort of re-examines the work? Can we talk about these discrepancies maybe a little bit? Because I think for all of us, we can also learn how to look differently at things and be aware of how we look at something.
I remember I went to Holland, to Netherlands in 2013. It was 2 years after the revolution, and the topic was still hot. And I had a meeting with a presentation with the school student, high school student. It's they were very like for genius. I don't know how to say it. They call it very fine.
Like prestigious, or
Not prestigious, but social. But they're really good students. And they asked me a question like, what would you add to the revolution with your writing? They were very well. There's some of them were Arabs, also Moroccan and Tunisian kids, but raised in Netherlands, and they were very enthusiastic about the revolution. What would you add to the revolution with your writing? I said, I have nothing to add but being a better writer. Maybe this might add to the revolution some way, and I believe that the engagement in the creation process has something to do with politics. It's not only an individual act in a bubble, but it interacts with the reality and the history and the politics, for sure, economics and everything. So that's an example that I remember from.
I don't have that much of experience. I'm mainly a film programmer in Cairo and other places in Egypt. That's what I do, and that's what my work have been focusing on. I deal a lot with representation in the programs that I do, but it's one of my first times to do a program on the representational level of representing where I come from, which is weird. I'm not sure I want to do it again, but you get to be paid in euros, because that's a real serious. It's a real serious factor, because you want to be part of those things because you get paid better in terms of your local currency. You go to places and you see people and move around, which is also something about movability and how those cultural workers can move around. But I'm not. What I can say is about what happens where I come from, what happens in terms of the representation in Cairo, because mainly most of those films that you're going to see, especially the films that have been produced post 2011, you're gonna read, you will see a European institution as funded, as a funder, and they funded those works, and that comes with a package, and it comes also with a circulation cycle. So your film can go to other places, and as those filmmakers, as cultural workers, they get to move around, they get to show their film, they get to be recognized, which I think is important. But I wouldn't say that I have that experience on the level. I have that. My main experience is of engaging with the local film culture, and I wanted to say this in the beginning, and that Egypt has one of, I don't know it comparatively, but it's super strong film culture. We can easily tell you 100 films that we all saw, and easily we saw hundreds of films and hundreds of film lines and TV lines, and in terms of film and visual culture, we're super spoiled. We watch films in our own accent, of course, Cairo accent, and films that we completely understand, and films that are produced for us, and even we have our own propaganda and our own independent cinema and our own. It's huge. It's a culture that is super established, and it's not super elitist. Some films are elitist, but film culture is not elitist. Everybody have at least a very solid film culture that can be shared and discussed among everyone in this country. We share a huge legacy and history of those films and how they were received and those stars, and it's huge and it's so deep and culturally effective and effective in a way that I think it's one of the richest conditions to be a film programmer, because what you're going to show to Egyptians, they saw everything, and then so this is actually where mainly my work comes, how to recontextualize stuff for Egyptian audience, how to bring stuff from the region that maybe Egyptians haven't seen. And on the other level, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about my program. What does it tell you? I'm not sure how the audience will react to it. I actually do not have that experience of showing films to foreigners.
One thing that would be interesting, I think, to hear from both of you also, is we've talked a lot yesterday and also today. I mean, we touched upon this. We talked about Cairo being this, beast of a city, that it sort of everything happens there. But maybe also, as you said, being a film programmer and functioning within the country, like, can we also talk about the rest of the country in relation to Cairo when it comes to, different cultural stuff, when it comes to literature, when it comes to films? How does that work? How does the infrastructure work? How is it developed? And, just for us to hear about the rest of the country also in relation to Cairo. We can talk about it through literature also, I mean.
Can you specify that?
So, Cairo versus the rest of the country.
Well, Cairo is a very central city. Very, very central city. But I think on the level of filmmaking, Alexandria is becoming also another center. And it was before, Alexandria was the beginning of movie industry. It started actually in Alexandria before Cairo, and now it's become more and more active again in Alexandria as a center of production on the small level, on the independent level. And for the literature, we have all the publishing house are in Cairo, and we still have governmental publishing houses, two big governmental publishing houses, organization for books, and writers from the countryside, from the other governorate, they try to reach the governmental sector of publishing and sending their manuscript to and fight and follow with the functionaries who works there to get their works out. And the private sector publishing industry, it's not stable. They don't have a lot of money. We have like one or two big companies with publishing houses, and few other small houses that make good books. But out of Cairo, there's nothing on this level for publishing or for cinema industry, or maybe we have still this cultural palaces. It's an old socialist thing that the Ministry of Culture own like small places, venues in the cities and in the towns that can be place for showing movies. No, but not in the palaces. It's central in the city, and they have theater, small theater companies in every one of those theater. This is the only cultural production out of the big capitals of Egypt, the Cairo, which is Cairo and Alexandria. But other places, they're completely poor on this level.
I think you can I think none of us is actually from Cairo, but we all lived in Cairo as cultural practitioners or cultural workers, and that tells you something. And lately, I've been interested in how films circulate and who gets to see what inside of Egypt. And I'm part of not me, my institution, CIC is part of a network of film clubs where the idea is for small, almost no budget films can circulate from outside of Cairo to Cairo and from Cairo to outside of Cairo. So we screen films in Malawi, which is a city between Minya and Asyut, and that's a film club that is established and where films can come from Cairo and from Alexandria. I agree with Yasser, Alexandria is coming back. Actually, the National Film Institute is opening a branch in Alexandria, so you can get to study cinema in Alexandria. You don't have to travel to Cairo. It's not the full thing. Some departments are there, some not. And it's a super central country, and it's and also you can tell from I mean, I'm gonna talk about films, not literature. You can tell from the accent that how people fake accents to look as if look from the countryside or to look from Upper Egypt and Southern Egypt. So this is something, we laughed because it's super established. It's people tried on the television and a series, TV series and films. So you can tell there is established fake accent that we can instantly tell, oh, this is okay, the Saidi, this is from Southern Egypt, It's not realistic at all, but cinema has established it. And okay, this is from the countryside. This is probably the northern countryside. Oh, this is Alexandria. So that's some stuff are central on the representational level that even the peripheries have their own stigma and representation in cinema. And also filmmakers from the center, and some of them are included in the program, they have this anthropological gaze to the countryside, to the other cities. So we have a film by Atiyat al-Noudi, and she follows. I love the film, but I mean it's also problematic on that level. That she follows a circus company, mobile circus group, and you can tell that the filmmaker is from Cairo, or at least that the filmmaker is not from that village where the thing is happening. And you have it all around. You have filmmakers with this anthropological gaze to the problems that is happening in the countryside. You have all the 80s, or Khairi Bshor, or Dawid Abdel, all those people that started with documentaries that I think are important, but I think they carry that trait. They carry how Cairo sees the rest of Egypt. That's.
But also, I want to say something, that the wave of making documentaries in the late 60s, it's completely different than the other wave that started in the late 90s. In the 60s, it was a little bit politically engaged movement and socialist and produced by the state. The other movement in the 90s, the independent movement, was more individualistic and more, and then by that time started the satellite era. We started to have different satellite channels in the Arab world, not only in Egypt but all around. In Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. And there was a promise that those channels gonna produce documentaries. And it's really started like this in Future Channel, like for example in Lebanon, and our channel, and Al Jazeera, but Al Jazeera was very politicized from the beginning. And Al Jazeera, and they started with this promise of we're gonna. So a lot of people think that they're gonna have a job like this, a nice job from making documentaries and live out of this, but they tend to be also those new satellite channels. They tend to be more into talk shows and political debates, and so this movement had its decadence.
I agree.
Now I would actually like to give the chance to our audience to ask a question.
أولاً اسمحوا لي أن أرحب بكما في زاغرب في كرواتيا. أنا اسمي دانيال بوتشان وكنت سفيراً لكرواتيا لدى مصر في التسعينات من 93 حتى 98. أنا مترجم، لكن أول اهتماماتي هي فلسفة، وأنا ترجمت عدة 10 كتب للفلاسفة كالفارابي، ابن سينا، ابن رشد الغزالي، ابن باجة وكذا. لكن let me switch to English. First of all, because my Arabic is rather rusty.
It's very good.
And secondly, so everybody can understand what I would like to ask you.
This is Ghazali Arabic. It's very.
It's a poor Fusha. Anyhow, I wanted to ask Mr. Yasser Abdel, maybe a question which might be even tougher than the question you got from the Dutch students.
Okay.
So instead of asking you what you can or could or would add to the revolution with your writing, I would rather ask you, is there anything, would you like to add something with your writing to the Egyptian literature?
I'm humble enough to tell you that I already added. I think what we can add now is the critic to what happened, to criticize what happened. Not in the, I'm not a politician, I'm not a political writer. Surely my writing contains, and my coming writing contains a lot of criticism to what happens, and to what happens from our part, not only from the counterpart, from our, what were our faults and mistakes, the mistakes we've done, the mistake we committed. I think this is what we can add.
So you answered actually the Dutch students' question.
Yeah.
My question was aiming at the fact that the actual contemporary Egyptian
Scene.
literature
Mm-hmm.
is rather a huge step forward from what we used to, when I was a student, what I used to study.
Mm-hmm.
Even from a huge step ahead forward, even from Khalil Gibran, from Mahfouz. Anyhow, what I wanted to ask is, do you feel yourself being a part of contemporary world literature, or rather a part of a literary heritage of your country?
Only my country or international? Well, I will tell you. This festival is concerned about small literature, which could be understood as the marginalized literatures, or the not very central literature in the international scene. But what I see, that Arabic literature is an international literature, and it has a very strong impact on this scene. But on the political level, it's not well estimated, because the region, our region, is really I don't know what to say, but in decadence. It's a place it's a fallen place. It's a failure, a complete political failure. But all the capacities and all what you see in the street from the young people, not only in the revolution, but in the everyday life, say that there's something international is happening, and I assume that it's happening in the literature too, and it's need to be seen, not by the measures of the big entities in the world, the big powers, the American or the French but you can say what you want to say and what you have to say, and no matter how they evaluate you, it's not your problem. But I think what is said is important, and it has something to add to the scene, to the international scene.
Thank you.
And you know maybe better than me how big is the Arabic culture and the Arabic literature. It's not because now it's the Anglo time, that we could reduce ourselves and vanish. It's their problem, it's not ours.
Yeah, it's a problem of a reception rather of
Yeah, it's their problems. I consider it's their problems.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have a question?
Thank you. Before my question, I wanted to add that we had not maybe even movies, but also series with fake countryside accents as well, and I find them very ridiculous. I wanted to, yesterday you two mentioned, and today it followed from what has been said, that basically Egypt today is economically and politically worse, even worse off than what was in previous times. So,
Yes.
in that respect, do you see 2011 happening anytime soon? Because are the people unhappy about the situation? I know they are disappointed. I know they are maybe depressed. But are they angry again? Enough to set off the new
Waves of.
yeah.
That's Yasser.
I'll try to answer very briefly. I think they're angry again. I think so, but not our generation. Our generation is very full with bad memories about the revolution, and they're all. Yeah, we get older. We have kids now. We are married. We have good jobs. The generation itself. So, but everybody in Egypt is angry, but helpless. It's a very awkward situation, I think. Maybe the younger generation will do something. I don't know, but I don't have any hope in our generation. We are stuffed. We are stuffed with bad memories and very traumatized and so on. So.
Nobody else wants to say something? I mean, there were some protests recently, or at least a hint of protests at the end of September. And I know that I was looking, a lot of people were also arrested, like right after the event. And I think I looked through some of the statistics that were available afterwards, and actually it said that like 60 or 70% of the people arrested were from 16 to 25 years of age. And so that I think sort of adds to this, you know, the younger generations might do something about this. Yes, of course.
I also think that probably this is more of a hope, but I see something from that hope happening, that it's not, that people are working on the struggle in slightly different ways, like pockets of struggles, pockets where you can have free discussions happening, pockets where you can have actually whatever you want be screened, and you know, those, it's not the huge iconic picture of millions of people in the street, but I think there's lots of work specifically from the generation that Nail has described as the traumatized group, but also they hold institutions, and they're actually running this. This generation is running institutions in Cairo and outside of it, and those institutions are allowing for journalists, allowing fit programmers like me, and allowing other visual and cultural workers to do what I think is related to resistance and not the revolution. So I'm not sure about the revolution, when a revolution starts, and is it about anger, is it about disappointment? I don't know. I cannot tell if a revolution happens, but I can assure you that those resistance, small resistance, are happening all around.
I'm looking at our audience, and if somebody else wants to use this chance to comment or ask something. We have a question there. I don't think my mic will get there, but maybe.
It doesn't matter, just.
Okay, you good?
Yeah, they can hear me, I think. I have a question for Yasser. It's a short question. Can you tell us who are your favorite Egyptian writers? And can you give us some names that influenced you, if they did, that is, influenced you as a writer and your writings?
Well, one of my favorite writers in Egypt, my favorite writers are mainly Egyptians. One of my favorite writers is a man called Yahya Haki. He passed away like 20 years ago, or maybe more, a little bit more. He was a multi-talented writer. He wrote mainly short stories and non-fiction. He had a lot of non-fiction books, like 17 or 18, but he was famous with one novel, which wasn't his best, but this one it was made as a movie. It was tend to adapted in the cinema, and that made his fame. But he was best in his short stories and non-fiction. Yeah. Oh, he had a film club, the man. Also, I like a writer called Badruddin. He's a writer from the generation of the 40s and 50s. And his younger brother, Alauddin, who was like my mentor somehow, Ibrahim Aslan. I like some great poets from Egypt like Salah Abdel Sabur, like Amal Dompel, like Fouad Haddad, like Salah Jahin, Al-Abnoudi. Naguib Mahfouz, of course, he influenced everybody who reads modern Arabic. Ibrahim Aslan, those are, you can consider those my favorites.
Thank you. Friends?
If no one else has some comments or wants to use the chance to say something or just, we go.
I would like to monopolize the
No, feel
the
free, feel
evening,
free.
but since nobody asked any more
You're an expert.
no question, no, I wanted to ask. Traditionally, a huge problem of Arabic literature, not only Egyptian, was the difference, the gap between Fusha, between literary language, classic language, and Amaya, which is dialect. Those are two separate languages. To what extent this problem exists for the contemporary Arab literature?
I think we overcome this. For my generation, me and Mansoura and Nail, we overcome this problematic in different levels. Maybe Mansoura is more close to the correct classical form. Nail is more close to the Ammayn. I'm in between them. But we don't have this preoccupation about should we write in Fusha. It's not a question anymore for us. We can use Ammaya within the narration itself.
Dialogues and so
Yeah,
on.
and work it in a way to don't feel the separation, the difference between the fluence of the phrase itself. I do this. It's not a, it's always a political question too, and religious question. The Islamists or all the conservative, they have a very bad opinion about using Ammaya in the writing. But it's not a question anymore. I think so. And also, when I put some Ammaya words in my narration, any Lebanese or Iraqi guy could understand what I'm saying. It's not that that's difficult now.
Thank you.
You have something to say about
No,
this?
I'd like to ask, maybe this is because the Egypt influence in sense of TV and cinema, so this might be not a problem for Egyptians,
Yeah,
but
that's
would
right.
be a problem for Iraqis and Syrians.
Yeah, mainly for Moroccan people and
Yeah.
and Algerian. Yeah.
Because Egyptian cultural production is going all over the Arab world,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
a huge production.
Yeah.
So they know Egyptian Ammaya.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
unlike you might not know Algerian Ammaya.
Exactly.
I also try to use Ammaya words or colloquial words that really based in Fusha.
Mm.
They became
Yeah.
Ammaya words, but they originally are Fusha. Like Shuf. شوف look.
Yeah.
It's a very فصحى word, classical, but it became عامية with the everyday using. So I prefer this area between the two.
Talking about the areas between, I just now would maybe, I think would be nice to hear just shortly, since all four of you are sitting here, and how often do you, since, well, for different reasons, you also live in different places, and how often do you get to meet and talk to other writers and have encounters like this, and how important it is to you, and do you miss it, and so on? Maybe you can give us a little bit of that.
Well, I haven't seen Mansoura since 2006. 15 years. We were living in Cairo for a long while together, but we were maybe in different circles. I work in the TV. She works in أخبار اليوم, newspaper. And Nail, he was for a while with her in the same institution. And Cairo is a huge city. We live in different neighborhoods. We need to go downtown to meet each other. And downtown, it's not anymore a nice place like it used to be. It's not. It's not. So we don't have the chance to meet. Even if we're living in the same city, we don't have the chance to meet that often like before. But when I go to Egypt, every now and then, every year I go for 1 month or something, I meet some of my friends, but not all of them. I went, since 2009, I went like 5, 6 times or maybe more. I haven't seen Mansoura or Nail during this time because I went for 1 month and it's very quickly and I had to do a lot of things.
I'm not a writer, and those are celebrities for me. It's the first time that I get to sit on the same couch with them. I'm gonna brag about it for the rest of the year to the people in Egypt.
I think we can sort of end on this note. We're very happy to have all of you here, and for this to be a meeting point of all of you, and also a meeting point of us with all of you. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks to our guests once again, and we'll see you next week.